welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Okay, picture this. It's 1893, Chicago. The city is absolutely buzzing, right? You've got the world's Columbian Exposition, the famous White City. Everyone's talking progress, innovation.
A real spectacle.
Exactly. But then, just a few miles off, there's this other building, something much darker, designed not for wonder, but, well, for terror.
And your sources nail it, describing it as honeycombed with secret passages, trap doors, and soundproof rooms.
Yeah, the chilling playground of H.H. Holmes, often called America's first serial killer, though that label itself is debated sometimes.
Group.
So you've given us this incredible stack of sources. We've got historical accounts, modern analysis, even a Reddit thread digging into misconceptions.
A good mix.
Our mission today is to really dive into the factual story of Holmes, go beyond the sensational stuff, and figure out how the systemic failures back then actually allowed all these horrific crimes to happen.
Right. Looking at the context, the 1890s were a different world. Rudimentary investigations, huge problems for law enforcement, trying to work across state lines.
And Holmes himself, this chilling psychological profile, a guy who confessed to tons of murders, but, well, far fewer were ever actually confirmed.
The gap between the myth and the reality is significant.
So what you can expect today, we're going to trace those failure points. Lax construction rules, law enforcement that was just getting started, really.
And the social fabric itself, right?
Yeah.
How does a charming con man operate so freely?
We'll pull out the key insights from your sources, try to separate fact from the yellow press fiction, those newspapers that just wanted shocking headlines.
Yeah, accuracy wasn't always priority number one for them.
And we'll see what enduring lessons this really disturbing chapter offers us today. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this. Setting the scene, Chicago's explosive growth and the murder castle. So we start in Chicago. The city's just exploding, growing like crazy, getting ready for the World's Fair in '93. Millions of visitors expected.
An incredibly dynamic, maybe even chaotic environment.
And the regulations back then, much looser than today, obviously. Seems like he created the perfect storm almost for someone like Herman Webster Mudgett.
Who starts going by H.H. Holmes.
Right. How did he even get started with this infamous building?
Well, what's fascinating and kind of chilling is how he starts as a pharmacist. Seems legitimate, but then cunningly acquires a business, gets fraudulent loans.
And builds the murder castle right there, practically positioned to lure people from the fair.
Exactly. And the building itself, it's almost like a symbol of Holmes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Outwardly, it looked prosperous, maybe a bit unusual, but inside,
yeah,
deeply disturbed and distorted.
Yeah, your sources call it an architectural monstrosity. Can you paint more of a picture? What was really inside this supposed hotel? It wasn't just quirky design, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the intent was clearly malicious. Outwardly, yes, maybe it looked like a hotel, shops on the ground floor, but the inside, your sources quote John Bartlow Martin describing it as honeycombed with trapdoors and secret passageways and walled-up rooms. The second floor reportedly had rooms that were soundproofed, gas jets controllable from the outside, doors that locked only from the outside.
Jeez.
And then these chutes leading straight down to the basement.
And the basement was the stuff of nightmares, right?
Pretty much. A makeshift morgue, essentially. Dissection tables, big vats, supposedly filled with acid, and a large kiln or furnace big enough for, well, cremation. It wasn't just a building, it was a purpose-built death trap. 2. The rudimentary systems of the 1890s. A criminal's paradise.
Okay, so this is where my mind just boggles. How did he get away with building something like this, let alone operate in it for so long?
Yeah.
It feels like the entire system, or lack thereof in the late 19th century, just wasn't equipped for someone like him.
That really gets to the heart of it. What were the, let's call them design flaws of the system back then? Well, law enforcement was incredibly decentralized, rudimentary.
Meaning like local precincts didn't talk much?
Exactly. There was no national database for missing people. If someone vanished in Chicago, police in Philly wouldn't necessarily know or connect it. Interstate communication was just painfully slow. Yeah. Telegraph existed, but it wasn't integrated systematically.
And forensics.
Oh, forensics was in its absolute infancy. You're relying heavily on eyewitnesses, maybe finding some physical evidence, but preserving it. analyzing it. Very basic.
So linking remains found later back to specific people would be incredibly hard.
Extremely hard, especially if bodies were
Mm-hmm.
processed, like Holmes did. You might find fragments, but without DNA, without good dental records widely available, it's almost impossible to identify everyone.
So for a guy like Holmes, this sounds like he could just slip through every crack.
Precisely. The biggest system failure was that sheer lack of communication and coordination. Different police departments, different jurisdictions, they weren't sharing information effectively.
What about things like building permits or business licenses?
Background checks, not rigorous at all. He could acquire property, secure credit, leave a trail of unpaid debts, and just move on or manipulate the situation.
And the construction itself, didn't he do something clever there?
He did. He famously kept hiring and firing construction crews.
So no single crew understood the whole bizarre layout.
Exactly. Before they could piece together the weirdness, the dead-end hallways, the rooms with no windows, the chutes they'd be fired, no one saw the complete picture.
And the local authorities? Too busy with the World's Fair?
Largely, yes. Their focus was on managing the massive influx of people, the logistics of the fair, disputes with suppliers, high worker turnover on one building project. Probably didn't seem like a top priority.
So missing persons reports just got lost in the noise.
Pretty much. Treated as isolated incidents. Chicago was a transient city, especially with the fair drawing people from everywhere. People disappeared, sadly. It wasn't immediately seen as the work of one person. This fragmented system was effectively an automatic safeguard for a predator like Holmes. The early warning signs and escalation.
Okay, so the system's full of holes. But surely something must have seemed off. Were there any early warning signs? Maybe whispers that should have raised red flags sooner?
Well, the warning signs weren't like flashing lights, more like unsettling patterns looking back, patterns of disappearances.
Who were the first?
Sources point to late 1891. A woman named Julia Connor, who worked for him at his drugstore, she vanished, along with her young daughter, Pearl. They're considered among his earliest confirmed victims in Chicago.
Oh man, a mother and child.
Yeah. And around that same time, there are reports, quite macabre ones, of Holmes employing someone to articulate a skeleton.
Articulate, you mean like put it together?
Exactly. Piece the bones together, mount it. And the skeleton was supposedly of an unusually tall woman. Could have been Julia Connor, perhaps?
Creepy. And others started disappearing too.
Yes. By 1892, other women connected to Holmes. Emmeline Cigrand is another name that comes up. She worked for him briefly, then vanished.
And again, without this centralized database, as you mentioned, these are just isolated tragedies. Nobody's connecting the dots back to Holmes specifically.
Not in an official capacity, no. Each case likely treated on its own. And remember, he's also running other scams.
Right, the insurance fraud. How did that fit in?
His relentless insurance fraud schemes, faking deaths, making bogus claims that should have raised alarms, you'd think, even within the insurance industry back then.
But they weren't talking to each other either.
Exactly. The companies operated independently, no shared database to flag someone pulling the same scam repeatedly. It was another critical subsystem breakdown.
And he was involved in bigamy too, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Multiple wives, often simultaneously in different places. He'd marry women, often for their money or property, then abandon them and sometimes their children. Again, exploiting legal loopholes because there was no national registry, no easy way to check if this charming Dr. Holmes was already married elsewhere. 4. The crisis apex. The Petetzel family and Detective Geyer.
Okay, so you have these disappearances, the fraud, the bigamy. It feels like a house of cards. It had to collapse eventually, right? What was the tipping point, the thing that finally blew this wide open?
The crisis really hits its peak. The point of no return, you could say, with the Benjamin Peetzel case.
Yeah.
And the investigation that followed.
Petetzel, he was Holmes's associate, right, like on the scams.
Yeah, longtime business associate, definitely an accomplice in the insurance frauds. Holmes cooked up this plan for Petetzel to fake his own death so they could collect a $10,000 insurance policy.
But Holmes being Holmes.
Holmes being Holmes. He didn't just fake Petetzel's death. He actually murdered him in Philadelphia. Made it look like an accident initially.
Okay, that's dark. But how did that lead to everything unraveling?
The real turning point wasn't just Petetzel's murder, but what Holmes did next. He gained custody, essentially, of 3 of Petetzel's children, Alice, Nellie, and little Howard. And he starts moving them around the country, telling their mother, Carrie Petetzel, that her husband Ben was still alive and in hiding, and that the children were safe with him or various relatives.
So he's manipulating the grieving widow while holding her children captive.
Exactly. And sometimes, chillingly, He'd have the children staying just a few blocks away from where their mother was, without her knowing. A truly sadistic cat-and-mouse game.
This is where Detective Frank Geyer comes in, isn't it? And the Pinkertons.
Yes. Carrie Pitzel became suspicious, the insurance company was investigating the claim, and eventually the Philadelphia authorities got involved, suspecting murder, not accidental death. Because Pitzel was murdered in Philly, it fell to them, and they brought in the Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Which was a big deal back then, right? Like, the detective agency.
Absolutely. They are nationwide, even international. And Detective Frank Geyer, his investigation was relentless. This is key. Unlike the local police, Geyer wasn't bound by state lines.
So he could follow the trail wherever it led.
Precisely. He meticulously tracked Holmes's convoluted path with the children across the Midwest, up into Toronto, Canada, following leads, interviewing people. It was painstaking work.
And this starts getting national attention.
Big time. The story spreads like wildfire via telegraph, and especially through those sensational newspapers. The yellow press again. Holmes potentially being involved in the disappearance of these children, it created national outrage.
And then they found the children.
Tragically, yes. Geyer's investigation led to the discovery of the bodies of Alice and Nellie in the cellar of a house Holmes had rented in Toronto.
Oh, horrible.
And later, remains believed to be Howard Pitzel were found in a stove in a house Holmes had rented in Indianapolis. These discoveries, they just confirmed the worst. It cemented Holmes in the public mind, not just as a con man, but as a monstrous, cold-blooded killer. The immediate aftermath. The murder castle revealed.
So the Pitzel case blows up. There's national outrage. They finally catch him, right? Where did they track him down?
They finally apprehended him in Boston, actually. On November 17th, 1894. It was the Pinkertons, working with Boston police.
And was it for the murders initially?
Initially, the warrant was actually for insurance fraud related to a horse theft scheme out in Texas, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But everyone knew the Pitzel case was the real focus.
Okay, so he's caught. What happens back in Chicago with the murder castle?
Right. The focus immediately snaps back to Chicago, to this building everyone's heard whispers about. It becomes this macabre spectacle. Hordes of people, journalists, just flocking to the site.
Like a morbid tourist attraction.
Totally. And the emergency response, if you will, was the police trying to conduct a thorough search for human remains inside this incredibly complex, bizarre structure. And of course, trying to contain the scene.
And the basement. What did they actually find down there? Because the stories are wild.
The discoveries were genuinely horrific, even without exaggeration. They found skeletal remains, some partially destroyed by chemicals or fire, these mysterious wooden tanks, and that huge iron stove, or kiln. Inside, they found fragments of human bone, bits of jewelry, fabric. Undeniable evidence of bodies being disposed of.
So the yellow press calling it a crematorium or torture chamber.
Okay.
Maybe not entirely wrong, just sensationalized?
Sensationalized, definitely, but rooted in grim reality. They also found surgical tools, instruments for dissection, and for bone articulation, remember the skeleton, which supports the theory that Holmes wasn't just killing people, he was potentially dissecting them and selling the articulated skeletons to medical schools or doctors, profiting from murder in multiple ways.
But you mentioned some historians push back on the scale of it.
Yes. It's important to include that perspective from your sources. Some argue that many of the so-called hidden rooms might have been used more for hiding stolen furniture or goods from his scams, rather than solely for murder.
Okay.
And one source strongly suggests the castle never for one day truly functioned as a hotel. It was mostly empty apartments and storefronts, not a bustling inn full of transient victims.
So the media definitely ran with the most lurid version.
Oh, absolutely. But even tempering the narrative, what they did find was horrifying enough. And the personal stories, devastating.
Like Carrie Pitzel.
Yeah, her anguish was palpable. She eventually confessed her own, likely coerced, involvement in the initial insurance fraud, terrified Holmes had killed her husband, then the agonizing search for her children. Just heartbreaking.
And other families came forward too?
Yes, like the Williams family. Their daughters, Minnie and Nanny, had got involved with Holmes. Minnie was even briefly married to him and had connections to his property dealings. Both disappeared. They weren't just statistics. They were real people with families left searching for answers. 6. Investigation, trial, and the elusive truth of confessions.
Okay, so Holmes is caught. The castle's secrets are partially revealed, at least. How does the justice system, still pretty basic back then, handle a criminal like this? The investigation must have been complex.
Well, Detective Geyer's work stands out. His meticulous pursuit across state lines
Yeah.
into Canada, that was really exceptional for the time, piecing together that tangled web of Holmes's movements and deceptions.
A testament to sheer persistence.
Absolutely. And when you do a root cause analysis, like looking back at why he operated so long, it comes back to those systemic failures we talked about, the fragmented policing. Local authorities may be missing clues or not connecting disappearances, and organizational lapses, like the lax building codes that let the castle get built in the first place.
It created this perfect storm for him.
It really did. Each failure point allowed him to continue.
Now, the trial itself, I hear it was quite the circus.
It was. He was tried in Philadelphia, specifically for the murder of Benjamin Pitzel and Holmes, in a move that just screams narcissism.
You represented himself.
He acted as his own lawyer, cross-examining witnesses, making speeches, further highlighting his manipulative personality.
Did it work?
Not in the end. Despite his attempts to confuse things, the evidence, particularly around the Pitzel murder and the children, was strong. He was convicted on November 10th, 1895.
And the confessions. He confessed to a lot, right? How much was true?
That's where it gets really murky. Before his conviction, he confessed to the insurance fraud. After conviction, facing execution, he starts confessing to murders. Lots of them.
How many?
Well, he gave one confession admitting to 27 murders. But many of those people were later found to be alive or the details didn't check out.
So just lying again?
Seems like it. Maybe for money from the newspapers. Maybe just for notoriety control. Hard to say. Later, he apparently told his lawyer he'd actually killed 133 people.
Wow. But the confirmed number is much lower.
Much lower. Based on evidence, historians and investigators generally confirm around 8 murders, maybe 9, including Pitzel and his children, Julia Connor and Pearl, Emmeline Sigrand, and Minnie and Nanny Williams.
A huge discrepancy.
It really highlights the difference between sensational claims and verifiable proof. His confessions were another layer of manipulation, obscuring the truth rather than revealing it. It shows how vital actual evidence is, especially when dealing with a pathological liar.
It makes you circle back to why? What drove him? Did the sources offer insights into his background, his psychology?
They do touch on it, and it fits some familiar tragic patterns often seen, though not always, in serial offenders. Reports of a difficult childhood. Physical abuse.
But his father?
Yeah, his father was reportedly an alcoholic who used harsh, abusive discipline. One source mentions a horrific detail about holding kerosene-soaked rags over the children's mouths to quiet them.
Oh my God.
Holmes also apparently had trouble socializing, was bullied at school, and that common disturbing trait, cruelty towards animals, finding refuge in the woods, dissecting animals, developing this deviant fascination early on.
So a mix of potential environmental factors and maybe something innate.
Likely. The sources suggest this combination may have contributed to him developing into what we'd now likely label a remorseless, narcissistic psychopath. Extremely controlling, a pathological liar, but able to mask it all with this superficial glibness and charm. 7. Resolution and enduring lessons for today.
So after the trial, the conviction, how does this dark chapter finally end?
H. Holmes was executed. He was hanged in Philadelphia's Moyamensing prison on May 7, 1896.
And that was the end of his reign of terror.
The immediate end, yes. But his case, the sheer scale of it, especially the interstate nature of his crimes, it left a mark. It spurred reforms, though they were slow.
What kind of reforms?
Well, it starkly highlighted the desperate need for better cooperation between law enforcement agencies in different states. People realized criminals didn't respect borders, so law enforcement needed ways to work across them more effectively. It laid some early groundwork, conceptually at least, for future federal involvement in certain crimes, think the FBI later on.
So it really was a kind of turning point for criminal justice.
In many ways, yes. A brutal wake-up call. It exposed those gaping holes in communication, the need for better record keeping, and definitely the need for more sophisticated crime-solving techniques.
Like forensics.
Exactly. The fact that they couldn't definitively identify all the remains found in the castle because the techniques were so rudimentary, that pushed for greater emphasis on forensic pathology, on proper evidence collection and analysis.
And the building itself, did that lead to changes?
It prompted discussions about more stringent building codes and inspections, certainly. The idea that someone could build such a death trap with secret passages and modifications under the nose of the authorities was alarming.
There's also that weird detail about his burial.
Oh, yeah. Quite ironic, given how he treated his victims' remains. Holmes was apparently paranoid about grave robbers dissecting his body.
So,
So he requested his casket be filled with cement, placed in the grave, and then have another 2 feet of cement poured on top, buried 10 feet deep. Extraordinary precautions for a man who dismembered others.
so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for us today? Why should we still talk about H.H. Holmes?
Well, I think his story is just this potent, really chilling reminder that human cunning can absolutely exploit systemic weaknesses. When oversight is lax, when systems aren't robust, bad actors can find ways through.
It underscores the need for strong regulations, diligent oversight.
Continuous evolution of investigative techniques, absolutely. In our world now, which is so interconnected, the ability to track people, share information instantly across jurisdictions, use advanced forensics, it's all paramount. These are lessons learned in part from failures highlighted by cases like Holmes's.
The bigger picture, then, is that his reign of terror is this stark warning about what happens when trust gets weaponized and oversight just isn't there.
Perfectly put.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Even now, over 125 years later, the Holmes narrative is still tangled up in myths and exaggeration.
Very much so.
He himself claimed, rather ridiculously, to be a very ordinary man, even below the average in physical strength and mental ability, even as newspapers were calling him the arch-fiend.
A final manipulation, perhaps. Downplaying his own agency.
Which leaves us with this kind of lingering question, doesn't it? How much of the H.H. Holmes monster story was the reality of his, cunning evil, and how much was maybe amplified by the public's own need to comprehend something so horrific to create this larger-than-life villain?
That's a really interesting thought. Where does the man end and the myth begin?
Maybe the most terrifying thing about Holmes isn't just what he did, but how easily those acts could be twisted, magnified, sensationalized, becoming this dark American tall tale that honestly still captivates and horrifies us today.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.